So, Timothy the Ghost Train. Sweet Lord! Timothy the Ghost Train is a very interesting and on and off concept within the Thomas fandom. Being once a creepypasta, this story has been adapted and portrayed by many users like 2020 Tesla and Kane Fan. In the original creepypasta, as well as Kane Fan's adaptation, we are introduced to a silver tank engine named Timothy, who looked exactly like Thomas. He was described as a very old and kind engine, as his passengers got on board his train. When he took off with his passengers, the midnight run started. During the run, Timothy passed his final stop due to failed brakes. He was switched onto the other line, heading straight for a cliff where a viaduct is meant to be constructed. His crew tried their best to stop him, but it was already too little, too late.
I will send you all to the graveyard.
Timothy has fallen off the cliff. He was mangled to pieces. His crew and his passengers were dead. An investigation was locked after workmen found the wreckage, and it was written off as another tragic train crash. Years later, the viaduct was complete, but once the rails were set and the nights rised, many workmen report seeing a ghost train roaming on the viaduct, plunging into the darkness and cursing everyone out in its demonic voice. There was no doubt that that ghost engine was Timothy. So, on every day on the date of its accident, Timothy runs again as a warning to others, plunging into the gap and shrieking like a lost soul. And that is the end of the original creepypasta. Now, this creepypasta has been adapted all around YouTube, but whenever it is, it normally starts and ends the same. But one of the most unique adaptations is by Kane Fan, where not only he adapted the original creepypasta, but also expanded more on it, by having Timothy encounter other engines like Henry, Gordon, and James, and even him having a character dynamic with his surviving brother, Thomas, as they are both E2s. For now, let's first focus on his story from the creepypasta he originated from. One thing that I like about it is the build-up, specifically where it says that Timothy passed the station and started to go faster and faster after his brakes failed, which is really good when you're creating tension because you don't know what's going to happen or what Timothy is doing. The implication of him not responding while going faster and faster, heading for his demise, enforces that eerie aspect in the story. The implication of his brakes failing and him going faster and faster to his impending demise was really good, but I also have a few issues with the creepypasta itself. Let's start with the start of the story. We're basically introduced to Timothy, being told what he looks like and what is he like in terms of personality. To be honest, I feel like what could have been done better here is, instead of just straight up telling us, maybe we could have been shown that, like, yeah, still have him look the same, but why not just show his personality, his kind gesture, and his design's condition in terms of age? Hell, maybe have him interact with some engines to enforce his personality, and maybe go into what is he like in terms of work ethic. I mean, the creepypasta implied that he's good at handling coaches during his midnight run before he fell off a cliff. What else does he do? Is he strictly passengers or is he mixed traffic? Like, at least give him some more context. Something like 2020 Tesla, when he made his own version of the untold story Timothy, Zero.
One of them was named Timothy. From what the other engines told me about him, he was an old but kind engine who was painted dark gray with the number 0 on his side tanks. He was a hard worker, though he could be prone to losing his temper if something didn't go right or upset him personally.
I really like this because this also establishes more about him instead of just saying he was an old but a kind engine. Sure, he may have spoke, but at least he used B-roll to show what Timothy does, other than handling the soon-to-be midnight passenger train he was taking in the original creepypasta. Now on to my second gripe. My second gripe with the creepypasta is the demon persona. Even though it's very, very frightening, especially in Kane Fan's adaptation and expansion, my problem with the demon persona is that when it happened, it kills off the eerie feeling in the story and the tension building up when Timothy was switched onto the wrong line. I'll be real here, I think the demon persona is better off not being in the story, because the less information or visual shown, the more scarier the story is. Since if you want to bring out the feeling of being frightened or scared from your audience, being scared doesn't just come from being jump scared, it could also be from the building suspense or the lack of information within the story. So removing the demon persona from Timothy would make the story more eerie, kind of like in this one adaptation, where the Trains and TVS remake of the creepypasta itself, but never shows Timothy being possessed, keeping that eerie feeling of uneasiness.
It's too late to do something. And indeed, it was too late.
Overall, the creepypasta, it's not that bad, but I wouldn't say it's great. I would say it's decent. Now we're done with the story, let's get to its basis. In most adaptations, and likely in the original creepypasta, Timothy is an E2, as he's often portrayed as, not just by fans, but also in Kane fans' take. The E2s were built between 1913 to 1916, and if we want to go by the factor that Timothy was a prototype by Kane fans' take,
you see, I was only a prototype for the rest of the E-class of E2 class.
he would have been built between 1912 to 1913. To be honest, looking at this from a design perspective, this could work, and by technicality, considering his brakes failed when he passed his final stop, it makes sense for him to be an E2, since E2s did suffer braking problems.
Reportedly, braking on the engines was hard too, with the air brakes engaging sharply and the engine's brakes being rather poor, which was one of the inspirations behind the story of Thomas and the Trucks.
However, despite Timothy being a fictional fan-made character, and him being the prototype being a fan-made thing, I don't know how to feel about that, because if he was a prototype, I'm pretty sure his issues would have been worse than the normal E2s, if, of course, he was ever the prototype of the E2s. The reason why I say is because most of the time in the Murray series, or I suppose Thomas in general, if a character was a one-off of a specific basis, they become a lesser version, or a better version of that specific basis. Getting on to another basis, one user suggested I explain how Timothy could work as an E1 or not work as an E1. However, I think the E1s could work for Timothy, given that they were built between 1874 to 1891, and one of them was indeed broken up for parts. It's perfect to have him as that if we're going to have him as a very old engine. However, when there's a potential good candidate and argument, there's also an opposition to it. Even though the E1s were successful as goods engines, they were, however, not popular with passengers. This is due to them just suddenly moving and being known as rough riders at passenger speeds, to the point where crews found it difficult to stay on their feet. This is a really good argument against why Timothy could not be an LBSCR E1, but it could be worked around with, because if his crash in the creepypasta happened in 1914, but he was built in 1912 or 13, and that's not old enough to declare that he's old. So it would make sense that he's a 19th century locomotive. His basis aside, let's focus on his character and personality. Getting to his character and personality, let's first go over the creepypasta first. At the start, Timothy was shown to be a very kind, yet compliant engine. And that's it really. That's all we know about him from the start. But it's only when he was approaching the viaduct is when we see him become possessed and turned evil, disregarding the lives of his passengers and even his own crew. So here, he's basically portrayed as good at first, but turned evil in the end. Now, this is where I differ from his original portrayal in terms of character to other portrayals, notably by 22 Tesla and Kane Fan. I'll first go over 22 Tesla's take. In 22 Tesla's take, he's still kind and compliant. However, it wasn't all. We do see an optimistic side of him in the scene with him and the old controller, only for it to be crushed down when the controller said he was to be scrapped. This caused him to be really upset, going from sadness to resentment, then to a deadly plan, where it would hint at his evil side that would occur in the story. And when he was talking to the other engines before his midnight run, he plays it off as it was his time to come, hiding his true intentions away from his fellow engines to contribute to his plan. And I guess This is where we know more about his personality, that he's not just a pushover, he's also someone with a sense of vengeance and is willing to go through that vengeance, regardless if it's gonna cost the railway or not, hinting that he also has a sense of selfishness. Moving away from 22 Tesla's portrayal in terms of Timothy's character, let's go over how Kane Fan characterizes Timothy. In his take and expansion, Timothy is revealed to be a hard-working engine even before his accident, believing that there was more that his class could accomplish. However, it's revealed that he has some kind of hatred towards the controller, and it was enforced when he was told he was going to be sent for scrap. And when he was a ghost engine, he's shown to be very, very evil, haunting the line, scaring off engines and people alike. However, when it comes down to his surviving brother Thomas, we see more of a very resentful and angry version of himself, all because his surviving brother Thomas is still around, while he and the rest of the E2s are no longer there. All three of these portrayals in terms of Timothy's characterization is very interesting, but where there's characterization, there are misconceptions between him from the creepypasta and fan creations to the official lore of Thomas and Friends. So let's go into that. Surprisingly, there are two misconceptions regarding Timothy and the creepypasta. The first misconception about it suggests that Timothy was the engine that fell out of the viaduct in both the railway series and the TV series, and that his story in the creepypasta does in fact happen in the world of Thomas. However, the ghost train in the books and in the TV show, the identity of the ghost engine is not confirmed. Especially when, if you pay close attention to the ghost train's model, it looks more like a saddle tank engine than a side tank. Hence, that cannot be Timothy, and Timothy himself cannot be an official Thomas character, given he's both a fan-made interpretation and character. Another one is in regard to who created Timothy. Now, there are some, if not most, that believe that Kane Fan created Timothy. Well, that is also not true. Sure, he made a whole series based on the creepypasta, even going as far as to expand it in his own way, but it was never known, at least as far as I am aware, of who really created Timothy. All we know is that he appeared in a creepypasta that popped out of nowhere, and that's it. Getting to my conclusion, the untold story of Timothy had its moments of ups and downs. Like, yeah, it's kind of edgy, but it did left a mark on the Thomas community and fandom, where fans did more of Timothy in their own way, whether it's headcanons or alternate universes, where fans give their portrayal of Timothy either in words or in physical form. Speaking of alternate takes, if I were to have a personal take on Timothy, I would not say he's an LBSCR E2 tank engine, let alone a recolor of Thomas. If I were to choose a specific basis for him that isn't an E2, I would probably pick the LNWR Webb coal tank built between 1881 to 1897, keeping him as a side tank, but also solidifying that he's a very old engine. But I don't know if I want to explore my take in this video right now, so let me know if you want me to do a whole video series on my take on Timothy. But personal take aside, even though I feel like the creepypasta could have done better in terms of like being scary or spooky, it's not that bad. It's okay. Sure, the context and build-up could have been worked on a bit more, rather than it being a nighttime disaster for the whole story. It did, like I said before, left a mark on the fandom. Now, I'm inclined to hear what you guys think about the creepypasta itself. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it overrated? You guys let me know what you think. But personally, I think the creepypasta is just okay. And that's just it. Just okay.